On the first day of July 1946, a B-29 Stratofortress took off from Kwajalein Atoll and headed to Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands, loaded with a Fat Man nuclear bomb. The atomic era had just begun, and the United States Armed Forces questioned the purpose of traditional weapons in the New World. Even the utility of the entire Navy was suddenly challenged. An experiment was then proposed in an effort to prove that the mighty fleet was still worthy of existence. It would be called Operation Crossroads, and it started when a 23-kiloton nuclear device was detonated on top of a ghost fleet of about 100 ships. While many vessels were severely impaired, one emerged virtually unscathed. It was the renowned Prince Eugen, a captured Kriegsmarine cruiser. The formidable ship would not go down with a single nuclear explosion, but a subsequent bomb proved more destructive. As chemist Glenn T. Seaborg put it, the spectators had just witnessed, quote, the world's first nuclear disaster. Nuclear weaponry was deployed for the first time in August of 1945, when the United States bombed Hiroshima on the 6th and Nagasaki only 3 days later. A new era of military warfare had just opened, the transition from conventional to nuclear armament. Shortly after the gruesome display of atomic power in Japan, Lewis Strauss, the Navy's representative from the Interdepartmental Committee on Atomic Energy, pondered about the role of naval strength in future conflicts, putting forward a proposal to test nuclear weapons on naval warships. Quote, if such a test is not made, there will be loose talk to the effect that the fleet is obsolete in the face of this new weapon, and this will militate against appropriations to preserve a post-war Navy of the size now planned. The Navy's funding was already at risk, as the purpose of potent fleets was suddenly questioned in a world that had mastered the nuclear bomb. Consequently, the Navy's high command agreed to carry out a test to prove that naval warships still had a place in the United States Armed Forces. Strauss's idea was straightforward. They would test the scope of nuclear weapons on as many targets as possible to demonstrate ship survivability. Still, the experiment could prove a double-edged sword, as the Army also showed interest in it, but to demonstrate the Navy's vulnerability. Within roughly 2 months, the Navy completed a list of 80 to 100 ships that would be used in the study. The endeavor would be called Operation Crossroads, signifying the transition to an entirely new type of warfare. The next challenge would be to find a suitable venue for the first atomic experiment since the Trinity test in July of 1945, and the first detonation of a nuclear device after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In late 1945, the might of nuclear weapons was well documented, but there was little knowledge about its reach. There was some awareness of fallout and the after-effects of radiation, but the impact of atomic weapons against armed naval forces was largely unknown. The search for a suitable test area proved challenging, as it needed to be in the middle of nowhere, but still within the U.S. or in U.S.-controlled territory. In addition, the test zone had to be uninhabited, at least 300 miles from the nearest city, with a nearby air base, and with a comprehensively protected anchorage of at least 6 miles to assemble the fleet. Moreover, predictable weather conditions were desirable to keep radioactive materials as condensed as possible. A top candidate soon emerged in the form of the Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. However, there were 167 inhabitants on the tiny island, and in March of 1946, naval authorities addressed the community to convince them to leave for a short period of time in the name of the good of mankind and an experiment that sought to end all world wars. The Bikinians agreed, and they were evacuated to the Rongerik Atoll 120 miles away. An enormous test fleet was assembled during the following months, including 242 target ships and support vessels, along with 156 aircraft. Targets included 4 obsolete battleships, 2 carriers, 2 cruisers, 13 destroyers, 8 submarines, and several auxiliary vessels. Notably, the Ghost Fleet incorporated a few enemy vessels from the war, such as the Japanese battleship Nagato and the cruiser Sakawa, as well as the German Prince Eugen cruiser. Numerous test subjects were also recruited, ranging from mice to goats, but the focus was always on the impact on the warships. The Crossroads tests were the first nuclear exercises publicly announced in advance, even extending invitations. Impressively, the event gathered no less than 42,000 military and civilian personnel. KMS Prince Eugen was the third Admiral Hipper-class ship and was launched in 1938. Although her commissioning was due for July of 1940, it was postponed a month because the cruiser was assaulted by the British Royal Air Force and suffered light damage. Prince Eugen and the legendary Bismarck battleship shared their first mission in May of 1941. Initially, the pair was to be accompanied by other units, but they were needed in combat as soon as possible and thus sailed unescorted to raid Allied commerce in the Baltic Sea, officially kicking off Operation Rheinebung. Despite the secret nature of the mission, a Swedish vessel quickly spotted them, and they were also identified by British aircraft. Regardless, they crossed the Denmark Strait at high speed to avoid further detection, with their radars turned on in the fog. Soon, HMS Suffolk sighted the Germans, but stayed put until reinforcements arrived. However, Prince Eugen spotted the British cruiser, and a brief engagement ensued, along with the incoming HMS Norfolk. During the confrontation, Bismarck knocked out her own radar with her guns. The German ships then retreated into the fog, and their last visual sighting reported Bismarck on the lead. However, with her radar gone, it was Prince Eugen's turn to lead the operation, and the cruiser took on the scouting role, which sealed her companion's fate. The Battle of the Denmark Strait began in the early morning of May 24th against the battlecruiser Hood and the battleship Prince of Wales. Believing Prince Eugen was the Bismarck, Hood targeted her instead. Hence, Bismarck was free to assault the British battlecruiser, eventually destroying Hood and damaging Prince of Wales. Despite the victory, Bismarck was severely damaged and attempted to reach occupied France for repairs. That left Prince Eugen on her own to continue raiding merchant shipping and sneaking further into the Atlantic. Just as Bismarck was sunk 3 days later, Prince Eugen was ordered to make port in France due to engine failure. While she dodged enemy convoys and reached for safety on June 1st, the Royal Air Force bombed the cruiser, and she would undergo repairs until the end of the year. Early in 1942, Prince Eugen, the battleships Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, and an escort were to fortify defenses in the Zone of Destiny, Hitler's nickname for the Norwegian theater. But before redeployment, the vessels had to travel safely to Germany. The famous Channel Dash began in February. Sailing close to the French coast, the small fleet fended off minor swordfish torpedo bomber attacks and evaded torpedoes from destroyers and fire from coastal batteries. Prince Eugen reached the fatherland unscathed, unlike her companions, which suffered significant damage. While serving in Norway, the cruiser took a torpedo hit from the HMS Trident submarine, but made it to port and back to Germany, successfully eluding 4 squadrons of torpedo bombers. However, she couldn't return to Norway due to constant British blockades and remained in the Baltic training cadets. She would then offer fire support against the Red Army as they pressed the Germans back towards the end of the war. Unlike many of her companions, Prince Eugen would also be assaulted by Lancasters and bombed several times, always emerging unscathed. Then, in May of 1945, she was surrendered to the British Navy and eventually became a war prize for the US Navy. Operation Crossroads was planned to include 3 tests, codenamed Able, an airburst, Baker, a shallow underwater detonation, and Charlie, similar but deep underwater. Within a year of the proposal, the test began, with 94 vessels moored in the lagoon, including Prince Eugen. On July 1st, a B-29 superfortress dubbed Dave's Dream took off from Kwajalein Airfield, carrying a Fat Man nuclear device named Gilda. Dave's Dream dropped the bomb at 28,000 feet, and Gilda detonated 520 feet above the target 48 seconds later. The 23-kiloton explosion engulfed the fleet and released significant radiation into the area. As the Los Alamos laboratory had warned, quote, The water near a recent surface explosion will be a witch's brew, and this will be true to a lesser extent for the other tests. There will probably be enough plutonium near the surface to poison the combined armed forces of the United States at their highest wartime strength. However, only 5 vessels sank, proving less damaging than expected, and Prince Eugen merely suffered from a bent foremast and broke the tip of the mainmast. The official report indicated that 6 ships were severely damaged and 8 more were impaired. In a real-world scenario, 40 vessels would have been put out of action. Less than a month later, the underwater detonation of the Baker test with a bomb named Helen of Bikini did not affect the cruiser in any significant way, but the area and ships were extensively contaminated by the fallout. The third test never occurred because of the US's inability to decontaminate the ships from the radioactive sea spray, and the island's inhabitants were never able to return home. 6 months later, Prince Eugen capsized and sank halfway into the sand of the shallow waters, having survived 2 nuclear blasts. Her wreck can still be found in the same spot over half a century later, where new life is emerging from the polluted zone, now merely a diver's attraction. On May 5, 1944, the massive USS Colorado battleship left San Francisco for Pearl Harbor as part of Operation Forager, the Allied bid to seize the Central Pacific from the hands of the Imperial Japanese forces. During an extremely violent encounter in Tinian, gunner Robert E. Lee would get the first taste of war's brutality after Colorado was struck 22 times by a shore battery, causing significant damage to the ship and several losses. However, the worst was yet to come for Lee and the rest of the Colorado crew. The battleship was then ordered to serve as part of the campaign off Leyte in November, arriving just in time to be on the receiving end of a lethal assault perpetrated by the Imperial Japanese Armed Forces. As the skies darkened with Japanese attack warplanes and anti-aircraft fire, Lee fiercely defended Colorado from his gunpost, with the water splattering all around the U.S. fleet from the explosions and the bullets raining down upon the American forces. Then, after a blinding flash of light, Lee turned his head up to see a Japanese kamikaze aircraft. It was diving straight for his position, and what happened next would seal the fate of the mighty USS Colorado. USS Colorado was a 32,600-ton battleship built at Camden, New Jersey. She was commissioned in August of 1923 and would become the central vessel in the Colorado class of warships developed by the U.S. Navy. During peacetime, she served to display American naval capabilities in Europe and protect U.S. allies and their interests. She then patrolled European waters in late 1923 and early 1924, after which she was transferred to the Pacific, where she would spend most of her long operational career. Before conflict arose in Europe, Colorado served with the battle fleet in the Pacific, participating in training and drill exercises. Still, even in peacetime, the American battleship took part in vital U.S.-led missions, spearheading the fleet's 1925 Trans-Pacific trip to Australia and New Zealand, and helping search for missing aviator Amelia Earhart in 1937. As Europe erupted and the U.S. tried to stay out of the conflict, USS Colorado was sent to Puget Sound Navy Yard to undergo a drastic overhaul of her already aging systems. It was amid this revamp that Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor opened the Pacific War, suddenly forcing the U.S. Navy to deploy all its assets for the all-encompassing conflict. As soon as Colorado was ready for action, she was ordered to report to Pearl Harbor to join the American efforts to push the Japanese back to their island. Then, from November 1942 to September 1943, she was deployed to the South Pacific to guard against a possible Japanese incursion. During this time, USS Colorado became one of the oldest ships in the South Pacific. Still, this didn't stop her from providing formidable support during the Tarawa invasion in 1943. In addition, the battleship and her crew would bravely serve during the landings at Kwajalein and Eniwetok in January and February of 1944, and the Marianas efforts in June and July, where the aging vessel provided essential support for the Allied landing operations. The battleship's luck would not run forever, though. and it drastically changed in the summer of 1944. After finding success in the Gilbert and Marshall Islands campaigns, the U.S. military began to prepare an assault on Tinian Island, where they hoped to recapture the island of Guam that had been taken by the Japanese Imperial forces right after their surprise raid on Pearl Harbor. Another important objective for the U.S. was the northern island of Tinian. This heavily fortified landmass had been taken away from Germany and given to Japan after World War I. Taking Tinian would be a massive blow to Japanese territorial integrity in the Pacific and their morale. The Japanese, expecting an attack to come any day, reinforced the island heavily, with the landmass protected by the 50th Infantry Regiment, commanded by Colonel Kiyoshi Ogata. Then, on May 12, 1943, an additional 2,349 Marines of the 3rd Special Forces Unit and 950 Marines of the 56th Naval Guards were transferred to the island from Truk. The reinforcements took over the defense of the island's airstrips, taking command of all the heavy artillery guns around the airfields and the 39 heavy anti-aircraft guns, while about 4,110 soldiers of various units defended the airports and the perimeter around the island. On July 16th, the U.S. Navy began their assault on Tinian to pave the way for the 4th Marine Division, which was expected to land 6 days later. USS Colorado, 2 other battleships, 5 cruisers, and 16 destroyers were tasked with the naval bombardment before the landing operations. The shelling began with the U.S. ships raining fire over the island's airfields and beach defenses. However, Japanese resistance to the naval strikes was fierce and unrelenting, as the defending troops made formidable use of the numerous 150mm shore batteries they had at their disposal to return the fire the U.S. Navy was dealing with the island defenses. Colorado and the destroyer Norman Scott were both pummeled by Japanese shore batteries, with the former taking the worst of the onslaught. She received 22 strikes on her deck, taking the life of 43 sailors and wounding another 198. The scene was described by gunner Robert E. Lee in no uncertain terms. Many of the lost men were close friends of the young man, and the attack took a heavy toll on him. Little did he know, he would experience a far more lethal attack only a few months later. Robert E. Lee was a young and ambitious Navy recruit who decided to join his family's military tradition by joining the Navy as soon as he came of age on February 14, 1944. As a friendly and easygoing fellow, Lee made numerous friends soon after being appointed a gunner aboard the battleship USS Colorado on April 23rd. Still, despite his aspiring yearnings, destiny had planned a dark and cruel fate for USS Colorado and her crew. After being grounded for repairs, Colorado was tasked to resume combat off Leyte in November. By this time, the U.S. campaign to seize the Philippine Islands was in full swing, and the Japanese were ready to defend the vital region to the very last man. As the U.S. prepared to invade the island of Leyte, Colorado was sent to support the effort. But the Japanese, witnessing their overwhelming loss of territories, men, and ships, had become increasingly desperate, employing more and more suicide attack tactics in an effort to cripple the Allied advance with the limited resources they still possessed. On November 27th, the U.S. fleet supporting the invasion was surprised by a massive air raid of over 60 Japanese attack planes. George E. Menner, Lee's shipmate, recounted the event, quote, "As we went around in circles, the Japs came in and all the ships opened fire. The Louisville took a hit on the turret. The planes kept coming in on us, as we couldn't tell if our radar was working the way it should because of the land." The task force was surrounded by islands, making the sailors doubt their radar reading as more and more warplanes poured into the battlefront. Several Allied ships were severely damaged by the aircraft's fire and the kamikaze strikes. 2 Japanese aircraft then penetrated Colorado's repelling fire amid the chaos, slamming themselves into the battleship's deck in a spectacular firestorm that left U.S. sailors temporarily blind. Menner continued, quote, "At 1 in the afternoon, a couple of planes came in and hit us on the port galley deck. The explosion and machine gun bullets roared as it hit. Parts flew from the fantail to the bow of the ship, 100 feet into the air. The flash almost blinded me as it flared up all over us. I didn't know what happened for a minute. I felt a small piece of flesh hit me in the chest, and one guy in front of me complained about his knee, which was cut. I knew then that we were hit. The sailors who had not been immediately neutralized swiftly fought against the roaring flames on deck. The scene was indescribably hideous. Menner and other sailors risked their lives throwing undetonated shells overboard before they could inflict more damage to their wounded comrades. Soon, Lee's gun was hit by a part of one of the striking planes, and Menner and other men took him and other wounded sailors off the ship to be treated by Navy medics in another vessel. Lee was severely wounded, but the young sailor managed to control the pain, even joking with Menner as he was being carried out in a stretcher. Despite the brave efforts of the medics to keep the sailors alive, most of the injured men didn't make it, including Lee. Ultimately, the Japanese kamikaze strikes inflicted 91 hits on Colorado's crew, while also damaging the ship. The significant losses suffered by the American sailors would not be in vain. The Allied servicemen soon liberated the Philippines from Japanese control, and USS Colorado continued to support them until the last day of the war. The Pacific Ocean was dark and quiet that night. Only the sound of waves hitting the USS Archerfish broke the silence. Inside the submarine's metal structure, Captain Joseph F. Enright stood at the periscope, eyes scanning the horizon. He was experienced and sure of himself, but his mind was filled with doubt, haunted by a past failure that nearly ended his career. This night was different, though, and Enright's focus remained fixed on the dark seas, driven by a need to make things right. And then he saw it, a faint shape in the distance, a large unknown enemy ship on the water. Just before midnight, on November 28, 1944, the USS Archerfish roared to life, starting its chase about 100 miles south of Tokyo Bay. The captain sent an urgent message to Pearl Harbor, reading, quote, "I am pursuing a large aircraft carrier." Unknowingly, Archerfish had found the Shinano, the world's largest aircraft carrier, on a desperate nighttime run from Yokosuka to Japan's inland sea. In the darkest days of World War II, as the balance of power began to tip against the once almighty Japanese Empire, an audacious plan was hatched within the halls of the Imperial Navy. Following the devastating loss of 4 fleet carriers at the Battle of Midway in June 1942, the Japanese Empire recognized a dire need for a vessel that could replenish the fleet, redefine naval warfare, and above all, save the Empire. Laid down in 1940, Shinano was initially envisioned as the 3rd Yamato-class battleship, a sister to Yamato and Musashi. However, fate had other plans for this massive, still under construction battleship. The Japanese Navy decided to convert it into an aircraft carrier, surpassing all others in size, capability, and might. The work on converting Shinano into a carrier began in 1943, drastically altering her design to include a flight deck, hangar decks, and other essential features for aircraft operations. This conversion was both a titanic undertaking and a high-stakes gamble for the Imperial Navy. As such, the new ship's existence became one of Japan's most closely guarded wartime secrets, and great efforts were made to keep the Allies in the dark. A tall fence was erected on 3 sides of the graving dock, and any mention of the new ship would bring the most severe of punishments upon anyone indiscreet enough to speak of it. As a result, Shinano became the only major warship built in the 20th century, never to be officially photographed during its construction. But Shinano was no ordinary vessel. It was to become the largest aircraft carrier of its time, a behemoth displacing around 72,000 tons, designed to cripple as many Allied ships as possible. Below deck, Shinano was equipped with state-of-the-art technology, including extensive compartmentalization to enhance her survivability, an almost unsinkable ship, and a sophisticated damage control system. Her arsenal was equally impressive. It wielded a formidable set of anti-aircraft guns, a clear warning to any who dared challenge her supremacy. Inside, Shinano was ready to house a fleet of aircraft, prepared to be unleashed at a moment's notice. More than just a ship, Shinano symbolized Japan's refusal to bow down. As she neared completion, this wonder of naval engineering awaited her place as the crown jewel of the Japanese Navy. As work on Shinano progressed in Japan, a smaller American submarine was built and finished in record time, with only 9 months between her keel being laid down and her commissioning. USS Archerfish, a 1,500-ton Below-class submarine, measured 311 feet in length and displaced 1,526 tons. This sleek submarine's specifications, while modest compared to the behemoths that patrolled the waters, were ideally suited for her designated role as a hunter of the deep. Powered by diesel engines and electric motors, she could reach 20.25 knots while surfaced and 8.75 knots submerged. Her impressive range allowed for extended patrols in enemy-infested waters. Her armament was also highly effective, equipped with 10 21-inch torpedo tubes, a 5-inch deck gun, and robust anti-aircraft defenses. During World War II, Archerfish was assigned to the Pacific Theater, with her patrols primarily focused on the waters off Japan and around the South China Sea, where she was tasked with intercepting Japanese shipping and naval vessels. USS Archerfish embarked on her maiden patrol in May 1944, under the watchful eye of Lieutenant Commander George W. Kell, cutting through the turbulent waters of the Marianas Islands. For a time, bad luck seemed to follow the small Archerfish, as unfavorable weather prevented her crew from spotting and attacking targets. Frustration mingled with determination as Archerfish's crew continued honing their skills, their hunger for victory growing daily. Finally, on Archerfish's third patrol in June 1944, she struck with precision, attacking and sinking an 800-ton Japanese patrol craft, a small but significant triumph in the vast and unforgiving Pacific Theater. With the arrival of a new commander, Captain Robert Clark, Archerfish's fourth patrol marked a turning point for the submarine. During this time, the crew managed to sink several vessels, including destroyer escort. Confidence bloomed within the steel hull of the Archerfish as she proved her worth. But this would soon change. Right before the submarine's fifth patrol in the fall of 1944, a new commander, Joseph F. Enright, took the helm. Captain Enright was no stranger to the demanding nature of submarine warfare. A seasoned naval officer, he had previously been the commander of the USS Dace, a Gato-class submarine. While leading this vessel, he had an opportunity to attack the Japanese aircraft carrier Shokaku, but the torpedoes failed to hit the target. This failure resulted in his removal from command in 1943, and soon Enright found himself yearning for a chance at redemption. His opportunity came with USS Archerfish. Enright steered Archerfish into her fifth patrol on October 30th, 1944, prowling the waters off Japan, a region teeming with enemy vessels, but also fraught with danger. He was a driven man, carrying the weight of past errors and determined to prove himself. Enright's leadership style was cautious yet aggressive. He emphasized thorough training and preparation, instilling in his crew the same passion and sense of duty that burned within him. Fate had something extraordinary in store for this determined submarine and her seasoned commander. 2 weeks after Archerfish departed for her fifth patrol and under her new leadership, the Imperial Japanese Navy formally commissioned the supercarrier Shinano on November 19th in Tokyo. Worried for her safety, following a flyover by a U.S. reconnaissance bomber near her location, the Navy General Staff ordered the carrier to depart for Kure immediately, where the remainder of her fitting out would take place. However, her captain, Toshio Abe, requested a delay in the sailing date. Most of the ship's watertight doors had yet to be installed, and the compartment air tests were still pending. Unsealed holes for electrical cables, ventilation ducts, and pipes were widespread. The fire mains and bailing systems, lacking pumps, were inoperable. Most importantly, Abe stressed that although the majority of the 1,900 officers and crew had seagoing experience, they still lacked training with the portable pumps on board. After Shinano's escorting destroyers for the voyage, Isokaze, Yukikaze, and Hamakaze returned from the Battle of Leyte Gulf to undergo repairs, as well as a resting period for their crews. The carrier left Tokyo Bay on November 28th. Aboard the unfinished ship, upon which the Empire had pinned its hopes for securing the Pacific, hung a large portrait of Emperor Hirohito on the flying bridge, surrounded by limited quantities of stores and ammunition. That month, Archerfish was assigned lifeguard duties for the first wave of B-29 superfortresses poised to strike mainland Tokyo. While Captain Enright and his crew understood the importance of rescuing American Air Corps crewmen who had ditched in the Pacific, they were restless for action. When the airstrikes against Tokyo were cancelled on November 11th, Archerfish was free to patrol the waters near Tokyo Bay, seeking out enemy vessels. On the night of November 28th, a thrilling opportunity arose. Captain Enright spotted a massive enemy presence on the sea's surface. After surfacing, the submarine's lookouts confirmed it, an enormous aircraft carrier, escorted by several destroyers. The Imperial convoy detected Archerfish with their radar and quickly began making swift and elusive maneuvers to evade the American submarine. A nail-biting 6-hour chase followed between the small submarine and the Japanese's saving grace. In addition to the inexperienced crew, Commander Toshio Abe had misjudged the number of his pursuers. He incorrectly assumed that a pack of submarines was tracking him, as was the standard procedure, and Archerfish was only a decoy. When Abe engaged in usual zigzagging tactics, he actually zigzagged his way straight into Archerfish, a tiny vessel he could have outrun if he just continued on a straight path. These mistakes gave Enright the opening he needed. Knowing that he was chasing something huge, even if he didn't know exactly what it was, Enright decided to launch his torpedoes a bit higher than normal. To sink anything that big, he decided, might need to be attacked further up its hull. While this deviated from protocol, the skipper was following his gut instinct. He was correct. After patiently trailing the ship, he then maneuvered the submarine ahead of it and waited for it to fall into the line of fire. When she did, he ordered the boat to submerge and prepare to attack. Shortly before he launched his torpedoes, Captain Enright took one final quick look at the Japanese ship through his periscope, quickly making a sketch of the ship for future reference. When the submarine's target was just 1,400 yards away, Archerfish fired 6 torpedoes at the carrier. After watching 2 torpedoes hit the mystery ship, the submarine quickly went deeper into the ocean to avoid retaliatory depth charges from the destroyers. At least 6 of Enright's torpedoes hit Shinano. The third strike was particularly disastrous, flooding one of the boiler rooms. When the incomplete structure failed, 2 adjacent compartments also flooded. Whether due to a lack of training or equipment, the crew could not counter the flooding fast enough. In desperation, Captain Abe had 2 of the destroyers in the group try to tow Shinano near the shore, hoping to beach her and have the vessel live to fight another day. But it was a lost cause, and the inexperienced crew could do nothing to save her. Soon, the captain gave the order to abandon the ship. Less than an hour later, the ill-fated vessel that never got the chance to fulfill her mission finally capsized, sinking stern first with a loss of 1,435 people, including the captain, who chose to go down with his ship. After 48 days on site, the triumphant 5th patrol of USS Archerfish came to a close on December 15th. Initially, the Office of Naval Intelligence acknowledged that Archerfish had sunk a cruiser, not believing that any carriers were in that stretch of ocean. However, Captain Enright had made sketches of the target, and he and the submarine were later credited with sinking a 28,000-ton carrier. The sub received the Presidential Unit Citation, and Captain Enright was awarded the Navy Cross. Whatever it was, the now vindicated Enright and his crew knew that they'd hit a really big ship, and they sailed on to their next war patrol. It wasn't until after the war that the captain and all his men learned the truth. Archerfish had made history by destroying the Imperial Japanese Navy's Shinano, the largest warship of the entire conflict. To this day, Archerfish holds the record for sinking the biggest ship that a submarine has ever taken down. Following this revelation, Fleet Admiral Chester W. Nimitz concluded by saying, quote, "It is fitting that an American submarine should climax the undersea campaign against Japanese warships by sending down the new queen of the Imperial Navy before she had an opportunity to come into action." In 1942, Malta's future hung by a thread. This vital British stronghold faced ceaseless Axis bombings, its people teetering on the brink of starvation. While rumors of surrender floated among the Allies, memories of the Royal Navy's disastrous PQ-17 convoy mission that was annihilated in the Arctic still lingered, a bruise on their honor. Now more than ever, Britain needed a victory. And so, British war planners formulated one of their boldest naval moves yet, Operation Pedestal. Tasked with this critical rescue mission, 14 merchant ships embarked, including the vital oil tanker Ohio, with their paths shielded by 2 battleships, 3 fleet aircraft carriers, and over 40 other destroyers, corvettes, and submarines. Their objective was clear yet perilous, and to accomplish it, they would need to navigate a Mediterranean sea teeming with Axis submarines, warplanes, and warships. It would be one of the most dire escort missions of the war. The survival of the Allies' most important base in the surrounding theaters of war depended on it. Covering a scant 122 square miles, Malta, a conveniently located rocky island with harbors and airfields, was a vital foothold for British air and naval forces and a staging post for operations across the entire central Mediterranean. The British colony was also critical for any future invasion plans for Italy and northern Africa. As such, this strategic linchpin became a prime target for enemy forces. For 2 relentless years, German and Italian bombers tried to flatten the island. Yet British troops and the Maltese locals held firm, conducting the war's longest defense action. By late spring 1942, however, the island's situation reached a tipping point. Buildings lay ruined or damaged from near-daily Axis bombing raids. Most importantly, supplies of wheat, flour, oil, aviation fuel, and anti-aircraft ammunition were critically low. In July, General John Gort, Malta's governor and decorated World War I hero, sent a message to British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Food and petrol would be exhausted by August's end. Life for citizens and British troops was hanging by a thread. With the clock ticking, the British Admiralty mounted one last-ditch effort, a large relief convoy codenamed Operation Pedestal, with the goal of resupplying Malta and staving off defeat. Returning to the United Kingdom from a successful operation that culminated in the occupation of the Vichy French base in Madagascar, Vice Admiral Edward Neville Seifert learned he'd been chosen to command Pedestal. This would be the largest and most powerful convoy attempted yet, boasting a heavy fleet escort of 2 battleships, 3 aircraft carriers, 7 cruisers, 32 destroyers, and 7 submarines, safeguarding 14 merchant ships. The most critical among them was the USS Ohio, a United States Navy ship crewed by British men, chosen for being the only fast tanker available on such short notice. Inside, the ship carried 13,000 tons of oil. The rest of the merchant vessels were filled with food, flour, ammunition, backup oil, and other essential supplies. A decoy operation was planned to distract German and Italian naval and air units, as Axis commanders were aware that the British would attempt another relief operation for Malta, as they'd done twice before without positive results. Meanwhile, Air Vice Marshal Keith Park in Malta had a torpedo bomber strike force ready to protect the convoy. This monumental operation, the largest and riskiest naval mission to be launched in the Mediterranean, was crucial for Malta's survival, and, in a way, for the honor of the United Kingdom. As the convoy ships convened at the Hyde Naval Base, the Royal Navy's headquarters in Scotland, Captain Dudley Mason, commander of the Ohio tanker, addressed his crew in the petty officers' mess, laying bare the monumental journey that lay ahead. Quote, "We sailed this afternoon. Our destination is Malta. You all know what that means. Ohio is the only tanker. We'll be fighting with 13,000 tons of high-octane fuel aboard. Now is the time for anyone wanting to back out to say so. However, be warned, if you choose to disembark, you'll be kept in the custody of the Naval Provost Marshal until the operation concludes. Secrecy is paramount." All officers and sailors decided to proceed. On the night of August 3rd, the main convoy departed. A week later, as the vessels entered the Straits of Gibraltar and the warm waters of the Mediterranean, each merchant ship's skipper opened a sealed envelope received at the convoy conference. Inside was a goodwill message from the First Lord. That day, the convoy entered the Strait of Sicily. From the onset, the Allied forces faced relentless attacks from German and Italian submarines, aircraft, and surface vessels. Despite the constant threat, the convoy and Ohio pressed off, fending off the assaults with a single-minded determination to deliver the vital supplies to their destination as swiftly as possible. August 11th marked a turning point for the convoy. An onslaught of Axis aircraft and submarines wreaked havoc, sinking several ships, including HMS Eagle, one of the operation's primary aircraft carriers. The harrowing assault only escalated the following day. A coordinated Axis attack, a dangerous mix of torpedo bombers and enemy vessels, claimed the cruiser HMS Manchester and 2 merchant ships filled with supplies. In the face of the relentless Axis aggression, Admiral Seifert was forced into swift, decisive action to evade disaster. His initial strategy, launching aircraft from the fleet carriers HMS Victorious and HMS Indomitable for protection, met a crushing blow. 3 bombs hit Indomitable, and her flight deck was set ablaze, ending her participation in Operation Pedestal. Admiral Seifert, with few options left, made the call on the night of the 12th to split the convoy, the fast section, including Ohio, and the slower section. Despite continuous harassment by Italian and German planes, the fast section pressed forward to Malta on the 13th. But Ohio wouldn't escape unscathed. An Italian aircraft's torpedo struck her critically, flooding the tanker, which miraculously didn't explode. The crew, despite the damage, managed to maintain control and kept her moving. The dawn of August 14th found Ohio in a dire situation. Punctured decks, a failing starboard engine, and a barely functional rudder were the least of her worries. The water was creeping steadily higher, and over half her crew was either gone or seriously wounded. But the crew wasn't ready to abandon their mission. They pushed on, despite the desperate circumstances, and Captain Mason faced the grim reality that it would take little more than a miracle to navigate his crippled tanker into Malta's Valletta Grand Harbor. During this pondering, a bomb tore through the superstructure, exploding in the engine room and blasting a gaping hole in the port side. Ohio, sinking lower and lower, was hastily tied to a destroyer with wire hawsers as they fought off continuous torpedo boat attacks throughout the night. Help came just in time, in the form of Admiral Harold Burroughs' Fleet Air Arm fighters. Burrough relayed the grim news to Mason. Only 3 ships had made it through, with provisions and ammunition. His message to Ohio's skipper was clear and resolute, quote, "They need you to survive. All Malta awaits your arrival. God bless you. I am proud to have sailed with you." As Ohio and her destroyers approached Malta, enemy bombers dived again. A near miss damaged the ship's rudder, blew a hole in her stern, and sunk her even lower, dragging down her tied-up escorts. At 8 p.m. on August 14th, the crew finally spotted Malta. Thus, tugs sailed out to assist the 3 ships, and enemy attacks ceased, as the enemy knew Ohio was rapidly sinking. As dawn broke, Ohio was spotted only a mile from Valletta Harbor. Thousands of civilians, British soldiers, sailors, and airmen silently watched their saving grace's miraculous survival. When the tanker passed through the harbor, the silence ashore turned into cheers, followed by guns fired in salute. On board Ohio, Captain Mason, busy fighting the fires, paused to give a faint smile. Some say he even shed a few tears. Congratulations from British authorities and the Admiralty in London soon poured in. But to Captain Mason, the most important of all was from Lord Gort, the governor of Malta, who spoke for the islanders themselves. Quote, "We are all so happy to see you and your fine ship safely in harbor after such an anxious and hazardous passage. You have saved Malta." The USS Ohio tanker was berthed at Malta's Parlatorio Wharf after her precious cargo of 13,000 tons of aviation fuel was unloaded. It was a close call. On the night of August 15th, the commander of the Royal Air Force fighters in Malta reported to Lord Gort that they could now mount unlimited combat sorties for 2 more months. Finally, a 4th crippled merchant vessel, the Brisbane Star, also reached the island, delivering a total of 32,000 tons of food, ammunition, and other supplies, enough to sustain the island bastion for almost 3 months. The delivery of supplies ensured that Malta could continue to function as a crucial base for launching air and sea operations against the Axis supply lines in North Africa, contributing to the eventual success of the Allies in the North African campaign. Among the decorations awarded to survivors of Operation Pedestal, Captain Mason was given the George Cross, Britain's highest award for a non-combatant, while 23 of his sailors and gunners were also decorated. On April 15, 1942, King George VI awarded the George Cross to the people of Malta for their heroism and devotion, the only time in history that an island has been given a medal. Malta never forgot Operation Pedestal and Ohio, and when the rusty hulk of the tanker was towed out of the Grand Harbor for the last time in 1946, the crowds gathered once again to say goodbye to their fallen savior. One of the colossal supercarriers developed by the U.S. Navy after World War II, USS Forrestal was an enormous capital ship built to show the world the extent of U.S. naval supremacy and guarantee its allies a new age of peace and prosperity. The almost 4 football field-long vessel immediately became a critical part of U.S. foreign policy, carrying shakedown operations in Guantanamo Bay before the Cuban Missile Crisis, supporting a military coup d'etat against Brazilian President João Goulart, conducting several NATO exercises, taking part in the Suez Crisis, and breaking numerous world records. But despite its extraordinary achievements, the carrier would be cursed with a series of catastrophic accidents and unrestrained fires that would haunt her crew for almost 4 decades. To assume its new central role on the world stage after World War II ended, the United States invested heavily in its naval capabilities so it could be better prepared for future threats. Furthermore, it had recently signed the North Atlantic Treaty and was now responsible for providing military support for NATO to deter a Soviet invasion of Europe. The war had put the first nail in the coffin of the old naval doctrine focused on battleships and ship-to-ship combat. Instead, the new carrier-focused principle demanded the creation of larger, more powerful aircraft carriers, able to launch entire swarms of warplanes in a moment's notice. A new class of colossal U.S. carriers of unprecedented size and tonnage then emerged. The Forrestal-class supercarrier was the first in a series of ships built under this new philosophy. With their unparalleled 75,000-ton weight, a size 25% larger than Midway-class ships, full integration of the angled deck, a huge island, and most importantly, their extreme air wing, capable of carrying up to 100 individual aircraft. The new Forrestal-class ships proved to be a military and naval breakthrough. USS Forrestal was completed in 1955, followed by USS Saratoga, USS Ranger, and USS Independence. At that moment, she would become the largest carrier in the world, surpassing the Japanese Shinano. More importantly, she became the first carrier specifically designed to support jet aircraft, and the first one built with an angled flight deck, steam catapult, and an optical landing system. With its daunting size, state-of-the-art technology, and the ability to deploy an unprecedented number of warplanes from its deck, USS Forrestal quickly became the pride and joy of the U.S. Navy, and the beacon of a new age of American naval supremacy. USS Forrestal deployed from Naval Station Norfolk in Virginia and spent her first year of service in training operations off the Virginia Capes and in the Caribbean. One of many critical tasks she conducted during those initial months was training. As the first ship of her kind, Navy crews had to undergo extensive training to learn how to use the new systems. On January 15, 1957, the supercarrier departed to join the Sixth Fleet in the Mediterranean, where she would spend most of her service years. With no significant conflicts in the region, Forrestal conducted several diplomatic tours in which she would visit local ports and take dignitaries and the general public on board. Forrestal made history in November of 1963 when Lieutenant James H. Flatley III and his crew made 21 full-stop landings and takeoffs in a C-130 Hercules aboard the carrier, setting a record for the most significant and heaviest aircraft landing on a Navy aircraft carrier. The feat was an attempt to determine whether the massive Hercules could serve as a super COD, or carrier onboard delivery aircraft, to replenish supercarriers on duty. Despite the success, the landings were later deemed too risky for conventional crews, and the idea was scrapped. Forrestal continued to serve in the Mediterranean region for several years, allowing the U.S. to respond to significant events immediately. One such occasion was when Forrestal rushed to Tunisia in 1973 to support the rescue operations in the flooded Medjerda River Valley near Tunis. A year later, amid the sudden Turkish invasion of Cyprus, USS Forrestal was crucial in helping evacuate U.S. citizens from Cyprus. In a significant joint Navy-Marine Corps operation, Forrestal provided air support as the Sixth Fleet evacuated 466 people in only 5 hours. But supporting U.S. troops was not the 20-year-old ship's only duty. Forrestal was chosen to participate in a particular shock test that entailed planting high-yield explosives near the hull of the massive ship to determine if a capital ship could withstand the strain of close-quarters combat and still remain operational. The test showed that the supercarrier was not only massive in size, but also incredibly sturdy. It is said that the crews aboard USS Forrestal had a generally relaxed and can-do attitude that often overshadowed the safety regulations. Such laxness strongly contributed to the many incidents that occurred on deck throughout the years. In October of 1968, a routine night launch turned into a significant incident. As the last VAW-123 E-2A took off, it violently skewed and went off the angled deck and into the water nose first. The aircraft then flipped over onto its back, breaking its radar dome and quickly submerging as it began to sink. A helicopter-led rescue operation was immediately deployed. 2 crew members were rescued, while the other 2 officers were deemed lost at sea. Then, on July 10, 1972, while moored at Pier 12 in Norfolk, Forrestal suddenly burst into flames when an operations room below deck ignited due to human error. The fire destroyed $7 million worth of computer equipment and caused the flight deck to glow red from the heat of the fire, suddenly leaving a hole in the surface. The sailors were able to pump water inside the hole to quench the flames, but the ship was severely damaged after the ordeal and underwent 3 months of repairs. The replacement parts needed were taken from USS Nimitz, which was under construction at the time. Another tragedy struck Forrestal on January 15, 1978, as an A-7 Corsair II from VA-81 crashed onto her flight deck and 2 men lost their lives. The pilot was operating without communication gear due to an onboard malfunction, and as he was making his approach, he saw the light signaling that it was permissible to land. However, he soon realized that the deck was covered with parked and moving aircraft. With no way to pull up, the pilot ejected and survived with minor injuries. Still, his plane crashed into another aircraft. Forrestal suffered at least 3 other fires during her career, all of which were quickly extinguished with no losses. Still, a disaster in July of 1967 would haunt the sailors aboard the supercarrier for the rest of their lives. On July 29, 1967, Forrestal was located off the coast of Vietnam, engaged in combat operations in the Gulf of Tonkin. Several camera crews were stationed on deck, recording aircraft launchings and landings as part of a training program. The footage shows the sailors immersed in their routines, with most of them not wearing any safety equipment. Instead of using the special munition elevators to load warheads into aircraft, the sailors lifted the projectiles on their own, disregarding safety procedures. Suddenly, an electrical anomaly caused a Zuni rocket on an F-4B Phantom to fire, striking the external fuel tank of an A-4 Skyhawk in front of it. A gust of fire and debris immediately spread through the aircraft. The sailors quickly rushed to help the pilots who were still on board their aircraft, but blinded by bravery, they failed to realize the flammable jet fuel was already spread across the deck and cooking off the fuel tanks of other planes. A massive chain reaction ensued, with a series of lethal explosions taking place as fuel tanks and munitions detonated one after the other. Several attempts to fight the fire were made, but time and time again, they ended in tragedy, as the crewmen were poorly trained in firefighting protocols and used water blasts to quench the flames. However, the burning fuel only spread, further worsening the situation. Eventually, the firefighters had to completely retreat as the fire became uncontrollable and the fuel began to leak below deck. As other American ships approached to support the Forrestal crew, specific instructions and equipment to fight the flames also arrived. Slowly but effectively, the sailors began to regain control of the perilous situation, and it took them 14 hours to put the fire out. In total, 134 sailors lost their lives, and another 161 were injured. The ship stayed afloat, but the damage exceeded $72 million, not including the damage to aircraft. Pilot and future U.S. Senator John McCain and future U.S. Pacific Fleet Commander Ronald J. Zlatoper barely survived the ordeal, as McCain was next in line to the aircraft that misfired the projectile that caused the catastrophe. The disaster persuaded the Navy to modify its firefighting practices. It also revised the weapon handling procedures and installed a deck washdown system on all carriers. To improve firefighting training, the new Farrier Firefighting School learning site in Norfolk was named after Chief Gerald W. Farrier, the commander of Damage Control Team 8, who was among the first to lose their lives during the initial explosions. But despite all the changes, Forrestal would go on to suffer several more fires before she was finally decommissioned in 1993. On December 19, 1944, the East China Sea churned with violence. Japan's newest aircraft carrier, Ryu, struggled against the sea, her hull punctured by an American torpedo. On her first combat mission, transporting a secret weapon to Luzon, she now fought for survival. Despite the hit, Unryu remained steady, thanks to Captain Kaname Kanoshi's command, keeping the ship's list to just 3 degrees. Nearby, USS Redfish lurked beneath the waves. Commander McGregor appeared through his periscope, knowing he needed a second salvo to finish the carrier. But then, destroyer Hinoki passed astern, perfectly lined up with Redfish's rear tubes. Unable to resist, McGregor fired. But Hinoki neatly evaded, leaving him with empty tubes and a still floating carrier in range. The skipper cursed his hasty decision, knowing it could have cost him his prize, but quickly refocused on the ship. As his crew frantically reloaded a single torpedo, McGregor knew this was his last chance. At 1,100 yards, he gave the order to fire. It would take 45 agonizing seconds to see if they had sealed the fate of Unryu, one of the Empire's last working aircraft carriers. By early summer 1942, the losses of 1 light and 4 fleet carriers at the battles of the Coral Sea and Midway sent shockwaves through Japan's naval planning circles. There was no denying it now. The Imperial Japanese Navy was losing its grip on the Pacific, and the tide of war was turning against them. In response, admirals hastily drafted an ambitious ship construction program, setting challenging goals that far outstripped their production ability. The carrier program was carried out with particular urgency, and between August and December, workers laid the keels for the first 3 Unryu-class aircraft carriers, Unryu, Amagi, and Katsuragi. This new type of ship, a scaled-down evolution of the earlier Hiryu class, displaced around 20,000 tons and stretched 745 feet. Made to be efficient in combat, the Unryu-class carriers could each carry up to 57 aircraft and featured a battery of dual-purpose and anti-aircraft guns. However, lacking the armored decks of their American counterparts, these carriers were vulnerable to attack. The plan called for a total of 14 carriers to be built by 1948, with up to 9 under simultaneous construction at its peak. This grand strategy hinged on critical assumptions about raw materials, industrial capacity, trained personnel, and aircraft production. But as Japan's resources dwindled, the prospect of the mighty class began to weaken. By the time the first of her class, Unryu, began her first deployment late in the year, Japan's naval forces were in tatters, and the ambitious plan for 14 Unryu-class carriers was faltering as the destroyer fleet, crucial for protection, had been decimated. With 50 destroyers lost, Japan's newest carriers were left dangerously exposed. The first of her class, Unryu, Heavenward-bound Dragon, was commissioned into service in August 1942 under the command of Captain Kaname Kunishi, a veteran of the Imperial Navy. Originally, Unryu and her sister carrier, Amagi, were assigned to Vice Admiral Ozawa's mobile fleet for the Battle of Leyte Gulf. However, severe shortages of aircraft and trained personnel prevented both carriers from participating in what became Japan's last major naval battle. Following Leyte's devastating defeat in late October, the remnants of the mobile fleet returned to Japan, and Unryu briefly flew Vice Admiral Ozawa's flag as the force regrouped. By mid-November, however, mounting losses disbanded the fleet, and carriers Unryu, Amagi, and the newly arrived Katsuragi were once again left without a clear purpose. Crippling shortages of fuel, trained pilots, and aircraft, compounded by the Empire's preference to launch more and more kamikaze operations in the Philippines, severely limited the carrier's potential. With nothing left to do, the powerful trio of sisters were relegated to routine patrols between Kure, Hashirajima, and Gunchan, never venturing beyond the inland sea. For Captain Konishi and Unryu's crew, it was a frustrating existence. Late November gave them their first and so far only taste of battle, when they managed to embark a few A-6M fighters and B-6N torpedo bombers for brief patrols, yet far from where the motherland needed them the most. That month, further losses in the war, like carrier Shinyo and the battleship Shinano by American submarines meant the threat was too significant to risk even short coastal trips for training or convoy protection. As a result, Unryu and her sisters appeared fated to idle through the rest of the war in the inland sea. On December 13, 1944, news of General Douglas MacArthur's invasion fleet near the Sulu Sea caused alarm in Tokyo. The long-anticipated invasion of Luzon seemed imminent. The combined fleet responded with urgent orders. Japan's newest experimental weapon was to be rushed to Manila by aircraft carriers Unryu and Ryuho. The weapon was the Oka, a rocket-powered kamikaze aircraft designed for maximum devastation in a single strike. These cherry blossoms, piloted by men on one-way missions, were Japan's desperate gambit against overwhelming odds. 30 Okas were rapidly packaged and loaded into Unryu's lower hangar deck. For well over 24 hours straight, the crew worked at a feverish pace, energized by the prospect of action after months of idleness. They knew this was the combined fleet's second attempt to deliver Okas by carrier. The first, aboard the massive Shinano, had ended when an American submarine sent her to the bottom before reaching her destination. Unryu's escort for the important mission comprised 2 new Matsu-class destroyers, Inoki and Momi, optimized for anti-submarine warfare and air defense. On December 15th, they were joined by the battle-hardened destroyer Shigure. Her name was legendary throughout the Imperial Navy, having earned a reputation for survival, though often as the sole ship to return from devastating battles. That night, intelligence revealed the enemy invasion was targeting Mindoro, not Luzon, offering a brief respite. The crew used this time to load additional supplies and personnel bound for Manila. Departure was delayed by a day, with Ryuho given an extra week to load more Okas and conduct her mission separately. On the morning of December 17th, the sleek Unryu, her hull and flight deck adorned with new zigzag camouflage patterns, slipped away from Kure Base. Loaded with planes, torpedo warheads, suicide boats, soldiers, passengers, and most critically, 30 Oka flying rocket bombs, she carried the hopes of Luzon's defense. Aboard destroyer Hinoki, Lieutenant Commander Sugama oversaw anti-submarine defense, but the weight of the squadron's fate rested squarely on Unryu's captain Kaname Kunishi. Their orders were to proceed to Manila, offload the precious cargo, and await further instructions on the Mindoro counterattacks. The following day, Unryu and her escorts pushed southward through increasingly turbulent seas. Twice, the crackle of enemy radar forced tense course adjustments in fear the enemy had spotted them. Unbeknownst to them, the U.S. Navy's attention was fixed on a savage typhoon that was exacting a devastating toll on Halsey's Task Force 38. Dawn on December 19th broke with howling winds, churning waves, and overall bad weather. Captain Kaname, his senses sharpened by years at sea, ordered heightened alert, and the task force narrowly avoided a mine. By noon, the seas began to calm as Unryu approached the Saishud Islands. While a few patrols were launched, the lingering poor visibility and swells made threat detection a near impossible task. Drawing on his destroyer experience, Kaname reminded his men to emphasize sound detection above all, knowing their ears might provide the only warning of impending danger. At 3 p.m., the formation tightened like a coiled spring. Shigure at point, Momi off the port quarter, and Hinoki guarding starboard. On the bridge, Captain Kaname and his officers peered into the gloomy horizon. Just an hour later, as Unryu turned south, she unknowingly set course right into an American submarine, USS Redfish, a Belau-class sub under the lead of Commander L.D. McGregor. On the afternoon of December 17th, Redfish was prowling off the China coast when an ultra message from Pearl Harbor warned of an important enemy task force moving south. Within moments, the sub was spotted by a Japanese patrol plane, dropping a depth charge that missed. Knowing the convoy might be near, McGregor scanned the horizon and saw what looked like a patrol boat's mast, then a second. Just before 4:30 p.m., his heart raced as a large flat top materialized. Gripping the periscope, he yelled, quote, Battle Station's torpedo. This is a big baby. Redfish surged forward at maximum submerged speed, right when the Japanese carrier zigzagged straight toward them. While 3 escorts flanked the carrier, McGregor's focus was locked on the prize, especially when the target approached at a 30-degree starboard angle, a near-perfect setup. Moments later, the submarine unleashed a spread of 6 torpedoes from 1,470 yards. After the sound watch aboard Enryu detected the submarine, sound contact confirmed an approaching threat from the starboard side, quickly followed by the alarming realization of torpedo wakes and the unmistakable noise of an imminent strike. Nonetheless, the crew sprang into action, guns blazing at the approaching wakes. Desperate to comb them, Kaname ordered Enryu into a hard starboard turn at full speed, the new carrier responding swiftly. Now, all the skipper and his men could do was hold their breath as the torpedoes closed in. 3 passed ahead, but the 4th found its mark, slammed into her forward section just beneath the island. On the bridge, Captain Kaname and his staff felt the violent explosion as Enryu shuddered, rapidly losing speed. Below decks, chaos erupted in a matter of seconds. The torpedo had torn into the control center, flooding vital compartments and igniting fires that quickly spread to the hangar deck's volatile cargo. But the most devastating blow came as the main steam pipe shattered, flooding boiler rooms, plummeting steam pressure, and forcing Enryu to lurch to a halt. Just then, the power failed, plunging the mighty carrier into darkness as she began to list starboard. Aboard Enryu, the crew fought frantically to save their ship. They battled fires, restored partial power, and struggled to right the list. After tossing trucks and equipment overboard, the list was evened. They managed to get the carrier barely moving again, but this triumph would be short-lived. Just as Enryu limped forward, Lookout shouted a bone-chilling warning. Another torpedo was incoming. While gunners unleashed a frantic barrage, it was futile, and the weapon struck with devastating precision. Slamming into her starboard side, just forward of the bridge, the torpedo found its mark in the ship's most vulnerable point, where ammunition, aviation fuel, and material stores were concentrated. Within seconds, a series of violent explosions ripped through Enryu, each more powerful than the last. Most importantly, the Oka bombs in the lower hangar deck joined the inferno. On the bridge, Captain Kaname and his officers were thrown to the deck as a massive fireball erupted before them. The ship lurched sickeningly, her deck tilting at a terrifying angle as Enryu heeled sharply to starboard. These explosions tore Enryu's hull wide open, and seawater flooded the boiler rooms with alarming speed. Within minutes, the list exceeded 30 degrees, sending aircraft sliding off the deck into the churning sea. Knowing the ship was doomed, Captain Kaname gave the order to abandon the ship. Yet he remained at his post, watching with a mixture of pride and sorrow as his crew assembled on the rapidly tilting flight deck. As they did so, the ever-so-disciplined men shouted, quote, "Banzai, long live the Emperor," 3 times before fighting for survival. Some gunners, defiant to the last moment, continued firing at the unseen enemy. Right before 5 p.m., Enryu made her final plunge, slipping beneath the waves bow first, taking Captain Kaname, his officers, and 1,238 souls with her. Only 12 minutes had passed since the explosion. Shigure and Momi raced to pluck survivors from one of the war's greatest naval disasters from the sea. Hinoki furiously set out into the perilous waters once more, determined to avenge the sinking. Hinoki furiously pursued Redfish in the name of Enryu and all who perished with her, launching her depth charges perilously close to the submarine, wreaking havoc on her systems. Going as deep as the vessel could, the Americans endured 2 hours of relentless depth charging before escaping. Hinoki and Momi pressed on to Manila, arriving on January 4th, 1945, just as MacArthur's invasion force approached. Ordered to flee to Formosa, American forces discovered them on January 5th, and a desperate chase ensued, where an aerial torpedo destroyed Momi, lost with all hands. Hinoki, damaged but defiant, made a final dash for safety, but was intercepted by American destroyers and sank after a fierce gun battle in what would be the last surface engagement between the US and Japanese navies. With Hinoki's sinking, a grim cycle was complete. Once again, Shigure alone survived from the squadron that had left Kure on December 17th. However, she would meet her end just weeks later while escorting a convoy. Ryu's loss, coming just 6 months after her commissioning, underscored Japan's rapidly diminishing naval strength. According to Japanese records, quote, her tragic fate was lamented by everyone. Her end mirrored that of Shinano, both carriers taking their Oka payload to the ocean floor instead of Luzon. And while the cherry blossoms finally arrived in the Philippines in March 1945, not even the human-guided bombs could change the inevitable. By then, the Imperial Japanese Navy and the nation could see the writing on the wall. The Imperial Japanese Navy's Mutsuki was a seasoned destroyer when the Pacific War broke out. Built in the 1920s, she first saw combat against China, but nothing had truly prepared her to engage the imposing Allied fleet in the 1940s. On the first day of the war, Mutsuki was deployed to Wake Island, where she first combated the Americans and suffered the humiliation of the first Japanese defeat in the conflict. However, she eventually returned and captured the precious island. Soon, she would have to fight the Americans again in the dispute over Guadalcanal Island. Then, after a brief bombardment of U.S. positions at Henderson Field that left her impaired, the destroyer joined Rear Admiral Tanaka Raizo's fleet. On the morning of August 25, 1942, American aircraft pummeled a Japanese troop transport. As the destroyer approached to offer aid, another wave of hostile B-17s closed in. The captain, however, believed the aircraft would miss. Tragically, he was wrong. Mutsuki was the nameship of her class and was the first of a dozen first-class destroyers built for the Imperial Japanese Navy during the 1920s. She and her sisters were developed as an improvement of the earlier Kamikaze-class destroyers, and they were built at the Sasebo Naval Plant in Japan. Overall, the ships measured 102.4 meters in length by 9.16 meters in beam, while their draft was 2.96 meters. Mutsuki and her class had a displacement of 1,315 long tons at standard load, and at deep load, it rose to 1,772. The power plant consisted of 2 Parsons-geared steam turbines. Each engine used steam from 4 Kampon water tube boilers to drive a single propeller shaft. The turbines produced 38,500 shaft horsepower, enabling the destroyer to reach a top speed of 37.25 knots. With a load of 420 metric tons of fuel oil, the Mitsuki-class vessels had a range of 4,000 nautical miles at speeds no higher than 15 knots. As for the complement, each destroyer could accommodate 150 officers and crewmen. On the other hand, the destroyers were armed with 4 12-centimeter Type 3 guns in single mounts, arranged and numbered 1 through 4 from front to rear. The first was mounted forward of the superstructure, the second between the 2 funnels, and the last 2 were positioned back-to-back atop the aft superstructure. Moreover, the Mitsuki sisters became the first to be equipped with triple 61-centimeter torpedo tubes arranged in 2 above-water triple sets. One mount was fitted between the forward superstructure and the forward gun, while the other was placed between the aft funnel and aft superstructure. The ships carried 4 reload torpedoes for the tubes, 18 depth charges, and up to 16 mines. Curiously enough, they could also be fitted with minesweeping gear. The first ship was completed in March 1926 and simply commissioned as Destroyer 19. She would receive her permanent name 2 years later. Throughout the 1930s, Mutsuki participated in several arduous exercises that helped prepare the Japanese Navy for war. She first saw combat in China during the First Shanghai Incident in 1932, and was later involved in several other engagements in the Second Sino-Japanese War. After World War II broke out, Mitsuki played a prominent role as the flagship of Destroyer Division 30 under Destroyer Squadron 6 of the 4th Fleet during the simultaneous operations of December 7, 1941. One day after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Mutsuki departed from Kwajalein as part of the Wake Island invasion force. The destroyer's mission was to transport an advance landing party of the Japanese Special Naval Landing Forces, or SNLF. By the early morning of December 11th, the American garrison stranded on the island made an unexpected comeback, repulsing the first landing attempts by the advance party. The SNLF troops were supported by a considerable naval force comprising the light cruisers Yubari, Tenryu, and Tatsuta, the destroyers Yayoi, Hayate, Kisaragi, Oite, Asanagi, and Mutsuki, 2 older Momi-class vessels converted to patrol boats, and 2 troop transports carrying 450 SNLF troops. Despite the Japanese naval superiority, the fleet suffered considerable losses during the first encounter, losing 2 precious vessels, Hayate and Kisaragi, to the U.S. Marine Corps coastal defense gunners and a handful of skilled pilots. Humiliated by the minuscule American force on Wake, the Japanese force was forced to retreat before landing the SNLF elements. The encounter marked the first Japanese defeat of the war. Moreover, it was the only occasion in World War II when shore-based guns successfully thwarted an amphibious attack. However, when Mutsuki returned on December 23rd with the second invasion force, once again carrying an SNLF advance party, the Americans would not be so lucky. After appeasing the remnant of the resistance on Wake Island, Mutsuki returned to Kwajalein. Then, in January 1942, the destroyer was detached to escort a convoy in the naval base at Truk. While there, the ship was fitted with a sponson for a brand new pair of license-built 13.2mm Type 93 anti-aircraft machine guns on the forward side of her bridge. Subsequently, she received a new assignment to escort a troop convoy to Guam by the end of the month. There, she participated in the invasion of the Solomon Islands and spent the first months of 1942 covering the landings of Japanese forces during the invasion of Rabaul, New Ireland, and New Britain, codenamed Operation R. She then fulfilled a similar role during Operation SR, offering cover to the invasion forces in Lae and Salamaua on New Guinea. Towards the end of March, the destroyer was assigned as the flagship for Rear Admiral Masao Kanazawa, commander of the 8th Special Base Force, where she took part in the initial occupation of the Shortland Islands and Bougainville in the Solomons. By late April, she also supported the occupation of the Admiralty Islands. From March 7th to 8th, Mutsuki was slated to serve in Operation Mo, supporting the invasion force heading to Port Moresby during the Battle of the Coral Sea. But when the operation was cancelled, the destroyer remained near Rabaul. For several weeks, Mutsuki served as an escort for shipping traveling between Truk, Rabaul, and Palau until she was recalled to the Japanese mainland in July. Back home, the vessel underwent a brief refit in her native Sasebo. With repairs completed by July 12th, Mutsuki was once again sent to battle with the Imperial Japanese Navy 8th Fleet. And on August 24th, she would aid in the Japanese's first major attempt to recapture Guadalcanal. As part of the Guadalcanal campaign, the Allies were attempting to establish a foothold in the Solomon Islands, from where they could launch a more powerful offensive. However, the Japanese had already landed troops on Guadalcanal, and the Allies were determined to prevent them from establishing a permanent base on the invaluable island. Meanwhile, Japanese forces began gathering at Rabaul, roughly 1,050 kilometers northwest of the disputed territory. In response, the American Task Force 61, under Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, concentrated southeast of the island. The fleet included the carriers USS Enterprise and USS Saratoga, and the battleship USS North Carolina, which had the support of numerous cruisers and destroyers, as well as aerial support from land-based aircraft from Henderson Field. When the two fleets made contact on August 24th, the Battle of the Eastern Solomons officially began. Aircraft from Saratoga sank the light carrier Ryujo and severely damaged the seaplane carrier Chitose. In contrast, Enterprise endured a pummeling attack from dive bombers from the carrier Shokaku. Ablaze, the vessel was out of control, but auspiciously for her crew, the Japanese were entertained elsewhere following an erroneous position report. While the carriers on both sides engaged in an epic encounter that would tip the balance of the Pacific War, Mutsuki offered support by directly bombarding U.S. positions at Henderson Field. If she was able to neutralize the enemy stronghold, the Americans' aerial capabilities would be significantly weakened. Mutsuki and a small force of 2 heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers then headed to the field and opened fire with their main guns. Although the bombardment inflicted significant damage on the base, U.S. aircraft responded with a swift attack, forcing the Japanese to retreat. Mutsuki was maimed, but survived to continue her duties the following day. Both sides withdrew their ships by midnight, and the next morning, a Japanese resupply convoy, led by Rear Admiral Tanaka Raizo, strove to force its way through to Guadalcanal. However, without the benefit of air cover, the convoy was left vulnerable to airstrikes from Henderson Field. The 5 vessels that had shelled the enemy base joined the convoy just in time to engage an incoming formation of 18 U.S. aircraft. The aerial strike severely damaged the flagship Jinsu, knocking the rear admiral unconscious. But another troop transport, Kiryu Maru, suffered the brunt of the raid. Severely damaged, the vessel sank as Mutsuki came to her rescue and moved alongside the crippled transport to save the survivors. As she rested, immobile, a group of B-17s appeared on the horizon. Unfazed, the captain resolved to continue their rescue efforts, assuming the high-level bombers would drop their cargo with negligible accuracy. Against all odds, the bombers scored with pinpoint precision, and the destroyer was sunk. As Mitsuki went down, her captain hauled, quote, "Even the B-17s could make a hit once in a while." Historian Richard B. Frank summed up the battle's significance, saying, quote, "The Battle of the Eastern Solomons was unquestionably an American victory, but it had little long-term result." Indeed, Tanaka retired only to return with his infamous Tokyo Express, which would ferry tens of thousands of Japanese troops and tons of vital supplies to Guadalcanal under the Allies' noses for several months to come. In the waning months of World War II, USS Canberra was thrust into the Pacific's violent theater of war. Newly commissioned, she navigated into the maelstrom of battle late, but her participation would be exceptional. Canberra met her trial by fire in the heart of the most brutal encounters: Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. Each battle drove her deeper into territories held in the clenched fist of the Japanese Empire. Yet, in the face of escalating danger, her luck was to crumble. On October 13th, Canberra fell victim to a brutal assault. A Japanese aircraft's torpedo struck beneath the cruiser's armor belt with remarkable accuracy. The blast hurled crew members into the air and ripped open the engineering rooms, exposing them to the relentless sea. She teetered on the brink, nearly claimed by the ocean's depths. But Canberra's story was not meant to end that day. From this devastating blow, she was reborn through a transformative overhaul. This reconstruction made her ready to grapple with the demands of modern warfare. The combat career of USS Canberra was far from over. It still had a pivotal role to play in the unfurling of modern history. Born from the efforts of Bethlehem Steel Company, Fall River Shipyard in Quincy, Massachusetts, USS Pittsburgh, a Baltimore-class heavy cruiser, was laid down on September 3, 1941. However, her destiny was rewritten mid-construction when an act of valor from the other side of the world resonated with United States President Franklin D. Roosevelt. During the Battle of Savo Island, the Australian cruiser HMAS Canberra demonstrated extraordinary courage, becoming an icon of resilience amidst the fierce conflict. This battle is marked in history as the United States Navy's worst naval defeat, a surprising onslaught led by Japanese cruisers and destroyers that left the Allied task force reeling. In the heat of the attack, HMAS Canberra was one of the first ships to bear the brunt of the enemy's firepower. The Australian vessel was critically damaged, her hull battered and riddled with shells. Yet, even under relentless assault and the threat of sinking, the crew stood resolute. Flames consumed the ship, and the wounded cried out in pain. Yet bravery emanated from the crew in the face of extreme adversity. Captain Frank Getting, though seriously injured, held his command from the bridge until he could no longer stand. Their valiant attempts to save the ship and protect their comrades were a testament to the unyielding spirit of the Australian sailors. Ultimately, HMAS Canberra was scuttled, her wounds too grievous, leaving 84 brave souls behind and 109 others injured. USS Pittsburgh's fate was sealed in honor of this act of valor. Renamed USS Canberra, the American warship was intended to be a living tribute to the Australian sailors' courage and sacrifice during the Battle of Savo Island. Lady Alice Dixon, wife of the Australian ambassador to the United States, had the honor of launching the newly renamed vessel on April 19, 1943. USS Canberra thus joined the rare leagues of United States warships named after foreign cities. Under the command of Captain Alex Riemann Early, USS Canberra officially joined the U.S. Navy on October 14, 1943. In a gesture of deep mutual respect, the Australian government reciprocated by naming a new tribal-class destroyer, HMAS Bataan, after the U.S.'s stand during the Battle of Bataan. departing from Boston in January 1944 and joining Task Force 58 by mid-February after a stop in San Diego. USS Canberra was cast straight into the Pacific's tumultuous theater of war. The fresh scars of her namesake's fall and the weight of her newly christened name set the stage for her brutal yet crucial role in the unfolding conflict. In the final days of February, USS Canberra flexed her might during the Battle of Enuitak, raining down supportive bombardment as Allied troops advanced. As March ushered in spring, she joined USS Yorktown's task group. Together, they dominated the skies, with air raids over Palau, Yap, Ulithi, and Woliai at the end of March and early April. She was the dutiful escort to Yorktown's aircraft, supporting amphibious landings at Hollandia and Wakta on April 13th. By the end of April, USS Canberra was transferred to USS Enterprises Group, participating in air assaults on Truk. During this operation, she flexed her individual power, detaching to obliterate a Japanese airbase at Satawan. The cruiser's relentless energy carried her through raids on Marcus and Wake Islands in May, escalating to join operations to seize the Mariana and Palau Islands in June. Her fierce involvement in the Battle of the Philippine Sea and her shelling of Japanese positions in the Bonin Islands demonstrated her integral role in this campaign. As summer bled into autumn, USS Canberra was relentless in her pursuit of victory. She performed raids on the Palaus and the Philippines, lending her powerful gunfire support during the Morotai landings in August and September. As October dawned, she joined Task Force 38, focusing on air raids on Okinawa and Taiwan, preparing for the Leyte landings. The war was almost over. Everyone could feel it, and after a streak of victories, the crew of USS Canberra was eager to go home and enjoy a well-deserved respite. Nevertheless, fate had other plans. On October 13th, a Japanese aircraft delivered a brutal blow, with an airdrop torpedo striking below her armor belt. The blast resulted in the loss of 23 brave lives, exposed her engineering spaces to the relentless ocean, and brought the mighty cruiser to a standstill. The ship began to take in water, and the crew fought bravely to keep her afloat. USS Wichita swooped in to tow her to USS Muncie, which then took over, putting a salvage crew aboard. Tragically, during the tow, the salvage officer from Muncie lost his life while diving into the cruiser's flooded engine room to make temporary repairs. After a grueling 2-week tow towards Ulithi, with the War Shipping Administration leased tug Watch Hill joining Muncie, Canberra was finally delivered to the repair ship USS Ajax. Following temporary repairs at Manus, the battle-scarred cruiser sailed under her own power to Boston Navy Yard. The ship was destined for much more than conventional repairs, and she would soon herald a new era in naval combat prowess. USS Canberra's active service came to a pause on March 7, 1947, as she was decommissioned and stationed with the Pacific Reserve Fleet at the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in Bremerton, Washington. However, destiny had a new chapter in store for her, placing her again at the forefront of innovation and power. On January 4, 1952, USS Canberra was selected for a transformative journey, a pioneering experiment that would turn her into a Boston-class cruiser. She was towed to the New York Shipbuilding Corporation in Camden, New Jersey, where she was to undergo a conversion into a guided missile cruiser. Her designation was changed to CAG-2, marking her new purpose and capabilities. In the crucible of conversion, her aft 8-inch and 5-inch gun turrets were replaced by twin RIM-2 Terrier missile launchers. Her aft superstructure was revamped, and her 2 funnels were remolded into a single unit. The intense modifications came to completion by June 1956, making USS Canberra the second guided missile ship in the USN fleet. She was intended to serve as the blueprint for future upgrades if the conversion proved successful. However, the lightning pace of missile technology advancement rendered the Terrier system obsolete by 1964, and the conversion was halted. On June 15, 1956, the transformed USS Canberra was recommissioned and assigned a new home port at Norfolk, Virginia. From June until March 1957, the cruiser sailed from Norfolk and throughout the Caribbean. On March 14th, she undertook a task of great honor, ferrying President Dwight D. Eisenhower to Bermuda for a conference with British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan. Back on American shores by March 9, 1958, the cruiser hosted a change of command ceremony in mid-April, witnessing Rear Admiral Charles B. Martel taking over from Rear Admiral Charles L. Milson as Commander of Cruiser Division 4 at Norfolk Air Base. Further adding to her accolades, on May 26th, the ceremony for selecting the unknown soldier representing World War II took place aboard USS Canberra. From March 3rd to October 24th, 1960, USS Canberra embarked on an 8-month round-the-world cruise, demonstrating her formidable missile capabilities to US and Allied forces. During the journey, she visited the site where her Australian namesake sank, paying respect to her heritage and the locations where she had served during World War II. But the peacetime operation would soon end, and geopolitical turmoil would send Canberra back into action. The year was 1962, and the world was teetering on the precipice of nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Pictures taken by an American U-2 spy plane showed the Soviet Union was building medium-range ballistic missile sites in Cuba. The missiles could carry nuclear warheads and hit major U.S. cities, including Washington, D.C. This escalated the threat level to a degree not seen before in the Cold War. Instead of launching a military strike against the missile sites, U.S. President John F. Kennedy decided to implement a naval blockade, which he referred to as a quarantine, around Cuba. This decision was made on October 22, 1962. The intention was to prevent any further offensive weapons from reaching Cuba. USS Canberra set a course south from Norfolk, joining a naval blockade to de-escalate the crisis. The once World War II cruiser now found herself in the throes of a different conflict, this time closer to American shores. Canberra and the entire blockade were crucial in resolving the Cuban Missile Crisis without escalation. Still, the warship's antagonism with communist forces was far from over. USS Canberra was stationed in San Diego when the Vietnam War broke out. She would deploy to Vietnam 5 times between 1965 and 1969. With her mighty 8-inch and 5-inch guns, she was a formidable force, providing critical support for American ground troops across several campaigns against the North Vietnamese Communist forces and the Viet Cong. In 1967 and 68, USS Canberra took the fight right into the enemy's home, operating north of the demilitarized zone, her guns raining destruction on bridges, transport routes, and shore installations, considerably weakening the enemy's infrastructure and ability to wage war. Still, even with no significant naval threats in the coastal waters of Vietnam, the region was not free from peril, as the cruiser found out on March 2, 1967. 2 shells fired from ashore struck her, resulting in 5 injuries and minor structural damage. Despite being technologically superior, the ship was not invulnerable. In an unfortunate accident on April 6, 1967, a young seaman named Doug Hegdal was thrown overboard by one of the 5-inch guns. He was soon captured by a North Vietnamese gunboat. He was imprisoned in the infamous Hanoi Hilton. His recollections would later expose the tortures committed by the North Vietnamese at their POW camps. As the 1968 Tet Offensive unfurled, USS Canberra relocated south to aid the embattled troops at Hue, launching an impressive 35,000 rounds in 31 days. She was redesignated to her original hull number, CA-70, on May 1, 1968. With the obsolescence of her missile armament, her 8-inch guns were again recognized as her main armament. However, the Terrier launchers would remain until her decommissioning. The cruiser's final tour in Vietnam concluded in early January 1969, marking the end of another chapter in her illustrious service history. USS Canberra was decommissioned on February 2, 1970, marking the end of an era of valiant service. Her name was stricken from the Naval Vessel Register on July 31, 1978, severing her official ties with the Navy. On June 15, 1980, she was sold for scrap to National Metal. She left the Saisun Bay Inactive Ship Maintenance Facility on August 1st to meet her final end. Bits and pieces of the once mighty ship endure, serving as reminders of her glorious past. One of her propellers found a new home at the Los Angeles Maritime Museum, preserved for future generations. The ship's bell found its way to Australia. Despite laws against the possession of naval artifacts by other nations, a campaign bore fruit when U.S. President George W. Bush presented the bell to Australian Prime Minister John Howard on September 10, 2001. It was a commemoration of 50 years of the UNZUS Treaty. The 250-pound bell now resides in the USA Gallery of the Australian National Maritime Museum. The legacy of USS Canberra is undeniably etched into the annals of U.S. naval history. A tribute to the fallen Australian cruiser HMAS Canberra, she remains the only American naval ship named after a foreign capital. This unique distinction symbolizes the enduring bond between the United States and Australia. Her service record paints a picture of adaptability and resilience. From a heavy cruiser in World War II to a guided missile cruiser during the Vietnam War, Canberra showcased the evolution of naval warfare. Throughout history, she stood firm, shaping the outcome of World War II, playing a part in defusing the Cuban Missile Crisis and providing invaluable support during the Vietnam War. USS Canberra, an emblem of honor, valor, and adaptation, has earned her place in the chronicles of America. Her legacy is carried forward by the battle scars she amassed, the memories of her crew, and the stories of her impressive feats in service of her nation. Outnumbered and outgunned during the fierce naval skirmish of Calabria, HMS Warspit's crew targeted the Italian flagship Giulio Cesare from a distance of over 15 miles, leaving a gaping wound in the enemy vessel and instilling terror in her crew. Warspit, despite its flaws, became an emblem of hope and resilience. From the Battle of Jutland in World War I to the pursuit of German destroyers in Narvik and the amphibious landings at Normandy in World War II, this iconic battleship made decisive interventions and reshaped the dynamics of naval warfare. German sailors of the Third Reich came to dread Warspit's silhouette, echoing the same fear their fathers felt during World War I. But it was the ship's crews throughout her service that raised her to mythic stature, giving her a reputation as one of the most precise and devastating battleships in the Royal Navy. Those she fiercely defended lovingly dubbed her the Grand Old Lady. To her foes, she was an ever-looming terror. Admiral Cunningham, Warspit's commander during her encounter with the flagship Giulio Cesare, later remarked, quote, "Never again would the Italian Navy willingly confront the fire of British battleships." For centuries, Britain's Navy reigned supreme, unparalleled as the world's premier maritime force. But as the 20th century dawned, the burgeoning German Empire, eager for supremacy, rapidly expanded its high seas fleet. Britain had recently launched 4 revolutionary Orion-class battleships under the 1909-1910 naval program. These behemoths, boasting 13.5-inch guns, set out to dominate the waves. Yet for every British stride, the Germans matched pace. By 1911, they had commenced work on the formidable König-class battleships, equipped with 10 12-inch main guns, 14 5.9-inch secondary weapons, and a staggering 14-inch belt armor. The Germans didn't stop there. 1912 saw the introduction of the mighty Derfflinger-class battlecruisers. These warships were fitted with 8 12-inch and 12 5.9-inch guns, protected by belt armor as thick as 12 inches. Most British battlecruisers, in comparison, only had a maximum of 9. To retain their maritime edge, Britain needed to do more than just match the German advances. They needed to eclipse them. Then came Winston Churchill. At 38, the First Lord of the Admiralty made a daring proposition. In May 1912, he approached the House of Commons with a plan to craft a new breed of super dreadnought, unlike anything the world had witnessed. These ships were to sport untested 15-inch guns, possess unparalleled armor, and in a dramatic departure from tradition, they would abandon coal boilers, a domestic resource, in favor of oil boilers sourced from the distant Middle East. Churchill, ever the masterful orator, made his case with passion and precision. He painted a vivid picture for the MPs, quote, "Imagine a battle between 2 eggshells striking each other with hammers. The value of striking first, hitting hardest, and sustaining the attack requires no clearer demonstration." The MPs were convinced. The super dreadnoughts got the green light. On November 26, 1913, Churchill's vision took form. At Devonport Dockyard, HMS Warspit touched water for the first time. For months, Warspit, alongside her sister ships Queen Elizabeth and HMS Barham, reigned as the pinnacle of naval engineering. But their era at the top was fleeting. By 1916, Germany's Bayern-class battleships, armed with 15-inch guns and capable of 24 knots, took to the seas. Yet Churchill's foresight had been astute. His relentless push for the Queen Elizabeth battleships would prove not merely beneficial but essential in the looming storm that Britain was soon to face. 1915 marked Warspit's maiden voyage, but the sea's embrace was anything but gentle. From the onset, this warship seemed cursed by a spell of bad luck. During her initial trial runs, Warspit faltered. Her engines, instead of roaring with might, choked and stuttered. Repeated breakdowns plagued the crew, presenting them with a litany of mechanical challenges they had never anticipated. Yet the streak of misfortune didn't end there. Later, in 1915, Warspit faced a calamity not from enemy fire, but from an unexpected source, her own escort. Misguided by her accompanying destroyers, she was directed through a narrow channel meant for much smaller vessels. Warspit found herself grounded, crippled, with her hull significantly damaged. Rescuing her required a Herculean effort. Once refloated, she limped to port, awaiting 2 painstaking months of repairs. Upon recovery, she took her place with the Grand Fleet, now part of the newly formed 5th Battle Squadron, designated for the Queen Elizabeth-class ships. But it seemed fate wasn't done testing Warspit. In December, another blow came. During a routine exercise, she collided with her sister ship, Barham. The impact inflicted substantial damage to Warspit's bow. Wounded, yet undeterred, she made her way to Scapa Flow in Devonport for more repairs. She would finally rejoin the fleet on Christmas Eve 1915. Still, her initial chapter in World War I was defined not by combat glory, but by a series of unfortunate rendezvous with the dry dock. In 1916, following the unsettling German assault on Lowestoft, HMS Warspit was summoned to the theater of war. Eager to shake off their past setbacks, her crew looked ahead, hoping for a chance to prove their worth. That opportunity presented itself at the Battle of Jutland, the single most significant naval confrontation of World War I. Under the seasoned leadership of Admiral Sir John Jellicoe, the British Grand Fleet squared off against Admiral Reinhard Scheer's formidable German High Seas Fleet off the coast of the Jutland Peninsula. This titanic struggle brought together an impressive 250 ships and around 100,000 men locked in a dance of artillery and strategy. As the battle raged, Warspit charged forth, a beacon of British naval prowess. However, her streak of bad luck hadn't entirely run its course. A troublesome mechanical glitch caused her to move in tight circles, rendering her an easy target amidst the rain of enemy fire. Despite the situation, Warspit's indefatigable crew fought back. They delivered heavy blows with each salvo, marking their presence on the enemy with unerring precision. Emerging from the commotion, Warspit bore the marks of battle, but she had undeniably proven her mettle. The Battle of Jutland ended with both sides staking a claim to victory. Yet there was no mistaking Warspit's valor and resilience. Post-battle, Warspit was due for repairs and soon found her place back in the 5th Battle Squadron. But her saga of misadventures persisted. An unfortunate collision with HMS Valiant after a nocturnal exercise mandated another round of repairs at Rosyth. It seemed the ship was a magnet for challenges, often sidelined and under the wrench. By June 1917, Warspit brushed against another ship, this time a destroyer. Thankfully, the damages were minimal. 1918 saw her back amidst the action, hot in pursuit of the German High Seas Fleet near the chilly waters of Norway. But as if on cue, a fire erupted in her boiler room, leading to another prolonged repair period. She returned just in time to escort the German fleet to Scapa Flow as the curtains of war came down. In the aftermath of World War I's brutal chaos, HMS Warspit emerged, not just as a survivor, but as a veteran, with battle scars to show for it. As the dust of war settled, it became glaringly apparent. Warspit, even with her battle-hardened reputation, was at risk of becoming a shadow in the face of rapidly advancing naval technology. The 1930s were not merely a time of change, but a rebirth for Warspit. Between 1934 and 37, the very bones of this storied vessel were reshaped at Portsmouth. She wasn't destined to fade into history as a relic of a bygone era. Instead, the Admiralty envisioned her renewed to dominate the seas again. Her heart, the propulsion system, underwent radical surgery. Out went the old, and in came 6 state-of-the-art boiler rooms, phasing out the dated 24 Yarrow boilers. The introduction of geared Parsons turbines didn't just amplify her power, but granted her a newfound efficiency, sipping rather than guzzling fuel. This change profoundly affected her stance. The weight saved was channeled to bolster her armor and sharpen her claws. Warspit's weaponry was no longer what it used to be. Gone were the days of her torpedo tubes. Her 6-inch guns evolved. In their place, she was armored with next-gen anti-aircraft defenses, menacing 4-inch high-angle guns, 2 octuple 2-pounder pom-poms, and an array of 50-caliber machine guns. Her 15-inch turrets were supercharged for longer reaches, and a futuristic fire control system stood ready, making her a behemoth in naval offensive warfare. But perhaps the most awe-inspiring transformation was her superstructure. A colossal armored citadel stood tall, safeguarding the bridge and setting the stage for flagship command. Her deck, now home to 2 cranes and an aircraft hangar, screamed versatility, readying Warspite for an array of military feats. HMS Warspite stood ready and modernized to tackle a new era of naval warfare. As World War II took the world by storm, Warspite took the role of protecting crucial naval convoys from and towards Britain. Fresh from escorting a convoy home, she was navigating back to the Mediterranean when Germany invaded Denmark and Norway. In an audacious move, a fleet of 5 British destroyers under Bernard Warburton Lee pierced the perimeter of the strategic port of Narvik, mere hours after the German invasion. They sunk 2 German juggernauts and several cargo ships, but at great cost to their own force. Though partly destroyed, they unveiled the vulnerabilities of German forces in Narvik. Warspite and her group of destroyers were summoned to deliver the coup de grace. On the chilling morning of April 13, 1940, the British Armada poised itself for battle with HMS Warspite at its helm under Captain V.A.C. Crutchley. With her fearsome firepower and impenetrable armor, the Grand Old Lady would lead the attack. While Warspite's cannons roared, raining fire on coastal barricades and anchored vessels, her ferry Swordfish reconnaissance aircraft hunted in the skies. The small aircraft zeroed in on U-64, marking the first U-boat sunk by aircraft in World War II. Guided by Warspite's unyielding gaze, the British destroyers avenged their comrades, eliminating 8 German destroyers in a fierce game of cat and mouse around the fjords neighboring Narvik. From the 10 that had originally invaded Norwegian waters, none were left. The Royal Navy raised its flag in triumph. The Kriegsmarine mourned the destruction of half its destroyer fleet. Warspite remained in Norwegian waters, taking part in a wide array of shore bombardments until she was ordered to return to Scapa Flow, prior to being redeployed to the Mediterranean on April 28th. She arrived in Alexandria just days before Italy's entry into the conflict. It didn't take long for her to go back into the fray. In a daring move on July 7th, Admiral Cunningham, sensing an opportunity, took his fleet straight to the heart of enemy waters, hoping to ensnare the Regia Marina in a fierce battle near the Italian coastline. As the 2 imposing navies clashed near Punta Stilo, the Battle of Calabria began. Outgunned and under intense pressure, the Allies found themselves on the back foot against the Italian fleet's superior firepower. However, Cunningham, undeterred, with Warspite leading the charge, pressed on against the overwhelming odds. As the sea battle raged, Warspite achieved an almost mythical feat, a gunnery hit on the Giulio Cesare from an astonishing 15 miles away, one of the longest recorded in naval history. The devastating blow tore a massive hole in the Italian battleship, sparking fires and chaos that crippled its speed. The Italians, despite having a numerical advantage, felt overwhelmed by the performance of Warspite. With their morale shattered, they executed a hasty retreat, using smokescreens to mask their escape. A relentless aerial onslaught from over 125 Italian aircraft tried in vain to break the British lines, but Warspite and her allies held firm. The battle-hardened Warspite triumphantly made her way back to Alexandria on July 13th. After the bold show of power, as Cunningham himself put it, quote, "Never again would the Italian Navy willingly confront the fire of British battleships." In the years that followed, Warspite became a dreadful threat that loomed over Italian and German plans in the Mediterranean, repeatedly thwarting Regia Marina's attempts at maritime dominance. March 1941 saw the Italian fleet audaciously setting their sights on vital Allied convoys maneuvering between Egypt and Greece. Cunningly armed with British intelligence, Admiral Cunningham plotted a devastating counter. Even when dwarfed by the imposing silhouette of the Italian battleship Vittorio Veneto, a newer and faster battleship, Cunningham's determination prevailed. He unleashed an overpowering airstrike, forcing the Italians into a demoralized retreat once again. In the relentless hours that ensued, the skies echoed with bombardment that scarred Vittorio Veneto and cruiser Pola. British forces, with unwavering precision, obliterated 2 Italian cruisers and 2 destroyers. Warspite spearheaded the British onslaught during the Battle of Cape Matapan. This confrontation severely weakened the Regia Marina, reinforcing the Royal Navy's unyielding grip on the Mediterranean. Warspite was tested further during the Battle of Crete. Battleship versus battleship confrontations were becoming more rare, and Warspite was positioned as an anti-aircraft vessel in support of landing operations. She endured the fury of German bombers, but eventually her defenses were overwhelmed, and she was hit by a German bomb that tore through her decks. In need of substantial repairs, she was urgently sent all the way to Bremerton, USA. Here she underwent profound repair cycles, ensuring she remained a force to be reckoned with. Once rejuvenated, she reinforced the Eastern Fleet, becoming a critical asset for Allied operations in the Indian Ocean. By 1943, Warspite was back, stamping her authority in the Mediterranean. She bolstered the Allied invasions of Sicily and mainland Italy. However, even after Italy's formal surrender, German defiance surged, and on September 14th, Warspite was again found by skilled German pilots. A guided bomb unleashed destruction upon her. One direct hit and a near miss that shook her entire core threatened to sink the mighty battleship. The most direct blow created a 20-foot breach in her hull, claiming 23 lives. Utterly crippled, she had to be taken back to Malta in a special operation, flanked protectively by cruiser Delhi and 4 vigilant destroyers. U.S. Navy tugs grappled with the challenge of towing her, particularly when tow lines gave way in the turbulent Straits of Messina. By September 19th, battered but unbroken, she reached Malta. After emergency mends, she transitioned to Gibraltar in November, and by March 1944, she made her way back to Rosyth for thorough repairs. In the bustling docks of Rosyth, the repair works on Warspite swiftly transformed her once more. However, this was not an update, but a desperate attempt to keep her seaworthy. Her formidable 6-inch guns were removed, their mounts plated over, making them a distant memory. The wound from the German missile was patched up with a durable concrete caisson, leaving behind an unmissable battle scar. One boiler room and the X-turret bore such severe damage that they were deemed beyond repair for the time being. Emerging from Greenock on June 2, 1944, the once majestic Warspite had seen compromises to her structural integrity and firepower. But only days later, she joined Bombardment Force D to support what was to become the most monumental amphibious invasion ever witnessed. With the dawn of June 6, 1944, Warspite's guns were the first to thunder, illuminating the horizon. Her initial target was the German battery at Vila, shielding the valiant British 3rd Division at Sword Beach. This relentless assault lasted for days. She dispatched over 300 shells, carving through the skies of Normandy. Though she now bore scars and was past her prime years, Warspite's presence was pivotal for the Allies, providing support during the Normandy landings. After a swift round trip to Portsmouth on June 7th to resupply, the venerable battleship rejoined the fray, supporting the Americans at Utah Beach and standing watch over Gold Beach. However, Warspite's war wasn't over. On June 12th, she returned to Portsmouth for supplies, but her guns were spent. She was instructed to sail to Rosyth via the perilous Straits of Dover, a passage no British battleship had braved since the war's onset. Her crew navigated the immense vessel expertly, eluding German coastal defenses with advanced radar jamming. But the wartime sea was treacherous, and despite their efforts, the crew was unable to avoid a lurking mine. It struck Warspite 28 miles from Harwich, obliterating her propellers. Repair efforts were fervent and exhaustive. Emerging with new guns, she could only muster a maximum speed of 15 knots, propelled by 3 shafts. Warspite's structural integrity was compromised. By the end of August, Warspite was back in action off Ushant, demolishing coastal defenses at Le Conquet and Point Saint-Mathieu during the intense battle for Brest. Along with Erebus, she laid waste to Le Havre, facilitating its eventual capture. And when the winds of fall 1944 began their descent, she collaborated with Erebus and Roberts, leveling the German defenses on Walcheren Island. Then, as abruptly as her journey had begun, Warspite was ordered to return to Deal. Without ceremonies, she was docked, her guns silent, having bellowed their last battle cry. Warspite had surpassed every challenge, fulfilling the hopes of a young Winston Churchill who had risked his career for her construction. 30 years later, Warspite played a vital role in aiding the now Prime Minister on the path to victory. Yet, the legendary status Warspite achieved, playing an unmatched role in 2 world wars, wasn't enough to protect her from demolition. In 1945, she was decommissioned, and her future became a hot topic. Many hoped she would be preserved as a museum ship to honor her remarkable service. Yet post-war Britain's economic situation and the substantial costs of maintaining such a massive vessel prevented this dream from becoming a reality. Charlie Pearson, a former crew member, expressed his frustration, quote, "Had she been an American ship, I have no doubt they would have preserved her as a museum and made a movie about her, the whole works. But not the British. Everybody loves our naval history, except us." In 1947, fate took a dramatic turn. En route to be dismantled, Warspite broke free from her tugs during a tempest, running aground near St. Michael's Mount in Cornwall. It seemed she was rebelling against her impending doom. Trapped in shallow waters during the storm, her skeletal crew of 7 faced grave peril. Multiple efforts to refloat the legendary ship proved unsuccessful. A British newspaper captured the moment, quote, "Her oldest loves, the wind and the sea, have helped the old lady of the fleet to cheat the executioner. She is ashore, apparently for good." By 1950, new initiatives to save Warspite attracted large audiences and press coverage. In an attempt to revive her, air was pumped back into her tanks. Yet, even with 24 compressors, the water was too shallow to permit refloating. It took a groundbreaking compressor and 2 jet engines from an experimental aircraft to shift the grand old lady just 130 feet toward the coast. Finally, in 1955, she was scrapped on the spot, having resisted till her last breath. Many of Warspite's gallant crew members continued to pay their respects at her final resting place until their own last moments. On November 20th, 1941, the lights of Fremantle Harbour awaited the return of a hero, the Royal Australian cruiser HMAS Sydney. A formidable vessel, Sydney was a modified Lender-class light cruiser, boasting a length of 562 feet and armed with 8 6-inch main guns. With a top speed of 32.5 knots, she could strike with precision and power and made for a fierce opponent in naval warfare. Yet, as days passed, the harbour remained eerily silent. Sydney, with her crew of gallant sailors and a wildly capable captain, was nowhere to be seen. 4 days later, air and sea searches painted a grim picture off the shores of Shark Bay. Amidst the vast expanse, boats and rafts emerged carrying survivors, but not from Sydney. These were sailors from Cormoran, a German merchant raider. Through the fragmented tales of these survivors, an epic naval clash came to light, a duel that left both vessels scuttled. But as every tale of Cormoran was recounted, a haunting void grew larger. Why, after such a monumental encounter, was there not a single Australian soldier left to tell their side of the story? HMAS Sydney, the pride of the Royal Australian Navy, was fast and heavily armed. Laid on July 8, 1933, she was initially ordered for the Royal Navy as HMS Phaeton. But when the Australian government purchased the cruiser during her construction, she was renamed after the city of Sydney as one of 3 modified Lender-class light cruisers with a maximum speed of 32 knots. Stretching 555 feet in width and with a beam of 56 feet, Sydney, when fully loaded, displaced 9,080 tons. Sydney's armament was a force to be reckoned with. She boasted 8 6-inch guns, 14 .303 caliber Lewis guns, and 8 21-inch torpedo tubes. She was also equipped with an aircraft catapult capable of accommodating a Supermarine Walrus floatplane, essential for reconnaissance missions. She sheltered a crew of 41 officers, 594 sailors, 6 Royal Australian Air Force personnel, and civilian canteen staff. As World War II dawned, Sydney quickly made her mark. In June 1940, during the Battle of Cape Spada, she sent the Italian cruiser Bartolomeo Colleoni to the ocean's depths, further elevating her renown and reputation. After that victory, she performed escort duties until January 1941. Then, recognizing the looming threats of German raiders and submarines, her mission pivoted to safeguarding Australia's vast coastline. In stark contrast to Sydney, the Cormoran merchant raider of the Kriegsmarine was a master of disguise, designed to seamlessly integrate into any nation's fleet. She was built for the long haul, with an astounding cruising endurance of 352 days. Behind discreet sliding shields, Cormoran boasted 6 medium-caliber cannons, a modest assortment of anti-aircraft weapons, and 6 21-inch torpedoes. Additionally, she was equipped with 360 ship-launched electric mines and another 30 mines designed to be deployed by her high-speed motor launch. For aerial reconnaissance, she housed 2 Arado 196A1 seaplanes. However, unlike many warships of her time, Cormoran lacked the damage control and firefighting systems crucial in battle. At the helm of this Kriegsmarine ship was Kapitänsreserve Theodor Detmers. Despite being only 38, the youngest of the German raider captains, he had ample expertise. Under his leadership were 26 officers and 375 crew members, all relying on his prowess. On December 3, 1940, Detmers initiated Cormoran's maiden voyage from Gotenhafen, reaching her operational zones in the Indian Ocean and Australian waters just over a week later. Her first victory came quickly, sinking the Greek steamer Antonis on January 6, 1941. By the 18th, she had added the tanker British Union to her list, guided only by her searchlights. She continued her spree throughout the winter, sinking British freighters Africa Star and Eurylochus and capturing 170 prisoners, delivered during a rendezvous with the German tanker Nordmark. Although engine issues grounded her in March and April, Cormoran's tally soon grew when she also added British tanker Agnita, Canadian tanker Canadolite, British freighter Craftsman, and Greek steamer Nicholas DL to her list of victims, of which all but one sank. During a May trip to the Cape of Good Hope, Captain Detmers made another strategic move by ordering his crew to camouflage Cormoran as the Japanese merchant vessel Sakito Maru with a freshly painted black hull. Her initial Indian Ocean endeavors bore little fruit, but fortunes changed in late June. Cormoran struck twice, sinking the Yugoslav steamer Velebit and the Australian vessel Mariba on June 26th. In the aftermath of her mounting recent victories, Cormoran underwent another significant transformation. She was no longer under the disguise of a Japanese vessel. Instead, an intricate overhaul made her look like the Dutch freighter Strat Malacca. This new identity featured a distinguished brown superstructure, offset by a striking black funnel. Operating extensively in the Indian Ocean, she experienced a dry spell until September 26, 1941, when she claimed her 10th victim, the Greek steamer Stamatios G. Ambirikos. By then, Cormoran's tally rose to over 68,000 tons of sunk cargo, but the merchant raider's most demanding encounter was yet on the horizon. On October 16, 1941, roughly 1,000 miles from Australia's west coast, Cormoran met with fellow German supply ship Kalmarland. For 10 days, the two vessels sailed side by side. Detmers transferred the prisoners from the last 6 sinkings to Kalmarland and took aboard enough fuel and provisions to sustain herself at sea until June of the following year. Following their separation, Cormoran's direction shifted westward. After essential engine maintenance was performed at sea, Detmers initially intended to mine the waters near Perth. However, he then received an intelligence message from the Naval High Command that hinted at a potential golden opportunity, an Allied convoy's departure, accompanied by a British cruiser. Adapting to this intel, Detmers steered Cormoran towards Shark Bay, located further north on Australia's coastline. As Cormoran steamed northeast bound on the afternoon of November 19, 1941, a Royal Australian Navy vessel was suddenly sighted on the horizon. While Cormoran achieved sinking after sinking, on May 15, 1941, Captain Joseph Burnett assumed command of the Sydney light cruiser. This Aussie captain was no stranger to the sneaky tactics of German raiders, as Burnett participated in planning defenses against early German surface raider attacks and reviewed all reports of Australian warships in action against them. Under Burnett's leadership, Sydney's service from May to August was largely routine, primarily involving escort missions throughout the region. By October 7th, she returned to Fremantle, her new base of operations. On November 11th, she departed for the Sunda Strait once more. After transferring escort responsibilities to HMS Durban, she set her course back to Fremantle, anticipating an arrival on the morning of November 20th. However, on the 19th, a Tower crew member spotted a seemingly benign merchant ship. Knowing the importance of diligence, Burnett ordered an increase in speed to intercept. As they drew nearer, he recognized the vessel as the harmless Dutch Strat Malacca, and the captain assumed no immediate threat. By 5:15 p.m., Sydney was almost alongside the mystery ship, the distance between them barely a mile. Sydney's strategic advantage was clear. She could easily target and overpower her with superior range and speed without endangering herself too much. Beneath her harmless facade, Cormoran's crew readied their concealed artillery. Burnett signaled once more, seeking details of the ship's voyage. Sydney's primary 8 6-inch guns and 4 torpedo tubes targeted Cormoran, watchful, yet not overtly wary. But Detmers, through his binoculars, noted Sydney's lax defenses. Her light guns weren't fully manned, with some crew visibly relaxed by the railings. Furthermore, Sydney's seaplane catapult, initially poised for a launch, had been retracted. Just then, Captain Burnett requested Strat Malacca's confidential Allied code, a detail outside Detmer's knowledge, and Cormoran remained silent. It then was clear to Detmers. Confrontation was inevitable. Swiftly, he commanded the Dutch ensign be lowered, and the German battle flag was proudly hoisted into the air, as well as her previously hidden weaponry. Within seconds, the unassuming Dutch Strat Malacca became a powerful Nazi aggressor. The fierce duel between the Australian and German ships erupted as Cormoran fired its guns and released 2 torpedoes. Almost instantly, her shots tore into Sydney, wreaking havoc on her bridge and director tower. In response, Sydney unleashed a salvo that, unfortunately, missed its mark. Cormoran's relentless barrage continued, setting Sydney's seaplane aflame. From the deck, Captain Detmers could almost feel the heat and chaos, seeing the devastation unfold on Sydney's bridge and superstructure. After a few moments of silence, Sydney's 3rd turret roared back, dealing crippling blows to Cormoran. Essential systems on the German ship malfunctioned, fires ignited, and darkness took over her engine room. Amid this maelstrom, one of Cormoran's torpedoes found its mark on Sydney. In a desperate bid, Sydney veered, seemingly trying to ram Cormoran. But even this maneuver wasn't without cost. A shell decimated the top of her 2nd turret. Though battered, Sydney's spirit remained. Yet, as the onslaught continued, her mighty guns fell silent. In stark contrast, Cormoran's guns barked relentlessly, piercing Sydney repeatedly. Inside, uncontrollable fires consumed her engine room. In a haze of smoke and desperation, Sydney released 4 final torpedoes. But luck wasn't on her side. They missed Cormoran, a ship already on borrowed time. Both vessels, scattered and aflame, continued their deadly dance. Cormoran, stubborn till the end, unleashed 1 final torpedo at 6 p.m., which, like many before it, missed. After 30 minutes of unyielding combat, both battered vessels were engulfed in flames, echoes of their former selves. Cormoran, her engine room a blazing inferno, fired her last shots. In less than an hour, she had released nearly 450 rounds, and countless more from her anti-aircraft guns. Seeing his ship's grim fate, Captain Detmers called to abandon ship as night cloaked the horizon. As the minutes ticked by, Cormoran's mines detonated, sending her to the ocean's depths stern first. The toll was heavy. 80 souls from Cormoran, including 2 officers, were claimed by the sea, many trapped in the submerged engine room. From the lifeboats, Cormoran's survivors watched as Sydney, battered and burning, faded into the distance. By midnight, the distant light from Sydney disappeared. There was not a single Australian survivor. Cormoran's surviving crew was captured by the Australians. Once taken in, they faced relentless interrogations, followed by years of incarcerations for the war's remainder. During this time, Germany awarded the POW, Captain Detmers, the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross for his leadership. The epic duel story was pieced together from German survivors' accounts, with no input from Sydney's crew. The Australian government remained tight-lipped about the incident, and only a brief description of the encounter was included in the Royal Australian Navy's official history of World War II. This, naturally, gave rise to rumors and conspiracy theories. To many, it's hard to believe that Cormoran, just a merchant raider, could beat one of the Royal Australian Navy's best ships. Some rumored that the Japanese might have helped, especially since Pearl Harbor happened only 2 weeks following the incident. To clear things up, in 1999, the Joint Committee on Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade of the Australian Parliament looked into the loss. But this report, too, stated the same. In March 2008, in Western Australian waters, more than 60 years after the epic battle, both wrecks were found lying only 7 miles away from each other. Upon inspection, the damage on Sydney's wreck, especially on its front gun, bridge, and torpedo launcher, showed how close and intense the battle had been. There was no other ship, no Japanese submarine involved. The sea had finally shared its secret. But some things will likely remain unanswered forever, like why Captain Burnett didn't deploy the seaplane to check the mystery ship from far away, or why, knowing about the German ships in Australian waters, he failed to double-check with the Navy office about the Strat Malacca. Most importantly, why wasn't the crew ready when they got close to a ship that could be dangerous? In retrospect, Captain Burnett erred getting close to Cormoran, allowing a surprise attack. Having the best ship, guns, and defenses was not enough. Being always watchful, careful, and ready to strike at any given moment is more important. The November 1941 Cormoran-Sydney fight remains the most devastating calamity in the history of the Australian Royal Navy.